Everyone at Drake Industries noticed it at the same time. The CEO stopped making decisions, not because he was confused, but because he was waiting for her. Meetings would freeze until his secretary walked in, contracts worth millions would be paused. Just one look from her, and he'd change his mind. Executives whispered, the board grew nervous, and then strange things started happening. He forgot meetings he had scheduled himself. He signed documents he would later swear he had never seen. And every time someone questioned her influence, his head would throb, like his mind was fighting something it couldn't name. But the most terrifying moment came late one night, when an elderly janitor stopped him outside his office and said, "Sir, she didn't charm you, you were chosen." That was the moment he realized the truth. This wasn't love, this wasn't manipulation, it was a spell, and the cost of breaking it might destroy everything he built. Stay with me, because when the truth behind the secretary is finally revealed, you'll realize the real danger was more than what you can imagine. They say power corrupts, but what if I told you that absolute power can be corrupted? This is the story of Alexander Drake Jr., a man who built a business empire from nothing. A man who commanded respect from presidents and kings, who could buy entire cities with a single phone call, a man who believed he was untouchable. Invincible, immune to the weaknesses that plagued ordinary mortals. But he was wrong. What happened in the gleaming corridors of Drake Tower over 6 months defied every law of reason, every principle of logic. It was a transformation so complete, so inexplicable, that by the end, even Alexander himself couldn't recognize the man he had become. Some called it obsession, others whispered about love, but the truth? The truth was far stranger, far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. This is a story about influence, about the invisible chains that bind us, about the moment when the most powerful man in New York realized he'd lost control of the one thing he thought he owned, himself. And it all began on a perfectly ordinary Monday morning, when a woman with hazel eyes and a silver crescent pendant walked into his office, and changed everything. At 38, Alexander had conquered everything worth conquering. His tech empire spanned 47 countries or more. His net worth? Somewhere north of 12 billion, though he'd stopped counting years ago. The number no longer mattered. What mattered was the power, the influence, the certainty that when Alexander Drake spoke, the world listened. But here's what the Forbes articles never mentioned, what the financial analysts couldn't quantify: Alexander Drake was profoundly, devastatingly alone. Though he had thousands of employees, dozens of so-called friends, a family scattered across 3 continents, each member perfectly happy to cash his generous checks while maintaining a comfortable distance. He'd had relationships, beautiful women who saw dollar signs when they looked into his steel gray eye. Men who wanted access to his network, his resources, his brand, transactions, every single one. Alexander had built walls around himself so high, so impenetrable, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. He told himself he preferred it this way. Emotions were liabilities, attachment was weakness. In the cutthroat world of international business, sentiment could cost you everything. He'd made peace with his isolation, or so he thought. "Mr. Drake, your 9 o'clock is here." Jordan Matthews, his executive assistant for the past 6 years, appeared in the doorway with his usual efficiency. Jordan was good at his job, discreet, organized, utterly predictable, and Alexander valued predictability. "Send them in," Alexander replied without turning from the window. "Actually, sir, it's not a meeting, it's your new executive secretary. HR said you approved the hire last week." Alexander frowned. Had he? "Yes, okay, send her in." Jordan hesitated. "Sir, I should mention, she's, well, you'll see." Before Alexander could ask what that meant, she appeared. Lila Harper moved through the doorway with a grace that seemed almost choreographed, yet entirely natural. Tall, perhaps 5'9", with chestnut hair pulled back in a simple knot, she wore a charcoal blazer and white blouse that suggested professional competence without drawing attention. But it was her eyes that struck him first. Hazel, luminous, holding depths he couldn't quite fathom, and something else, a calmness, a stillness that seemed impossible in the frenetic energy of Drake Tower. "Mr. Drake." Her voice was warm but professional. "I am Lila Harper, and I'm honored to be joining your team." Alexander found himself momentarily speechless, an unusual experience, He extended his hand, and when their palms touched, he felt a warmth, a connection, something indefinable that made him hold the handshake a fraction too long. "Welcome to Drake Enterprises, Ms. Harper," he recovered quickly, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Your resume is impressive. Harvard Business School, 5 years at Goldman Sachs, fluent in 3 languages, you're overqualified for a secretarial position." She smiled, and something in his chest tightened. "I prefer to think of myself as qualified for whatever challenges present themselves, Mr. Drake. I'm not interested in titles, I'm interested in meaningful work." As they discussed her responsibilities, Alexander noticed a silver pendant resting against her collarbone, a crescent moon, delicately crafted, catching the light with each subtle movement. There was something hypnotic about it, the way it glimmered and swayed. He forced his attention back to her face. "You'll start immediately. Jordan will show you to your desk and bring you up to speed on current projects. I expect nothing less than excellence, Ms. Harper." "You'll have nothing less, Mr. Drake." After she left, Alexander stood alone in his office, disturbed by the encounter in ways he couldn't articulate. He'd interviewed hundreds of people over the years. This was strange. It shouldn't have been different, but it was. The changes started small, so small that Alexander almost didn't notice. On her 3rd day, Lila suggested reorganizing his schedule to accommodate longer strategic thinking sessions. He'd planned his days the same way for 15 years, but something about her logic made sense, and he agreed. On her 5th day, she recommended declining a lucrative partnership with a Chinese tech firm. Alexander had spent months negotiating the deal. Every advisor said it was solid, but Lila pointed out 3 subtle clauses in the contract that could become problematic. "Trust me, Mr. Drake," she'd said, those hazel eyes holding his gaze. "This isn't the right move." And inexplicably, impossibly, he trusted her. He killed the deal. 2 weeks later, the Chinese firm was exposed for IP theft and fraud. Lila's instincts had saved him hundreds of millions. By the 2nd week, Alexander found himself consulting her on decisions that went far beyond her role: marketing strategies, board presentations, even personal matters, like which charity event to attend. "What do you think, Lila?" became his most frequently spoken phrase. Jordan noticed first. "Sir, with all due respect, Ms. Harper has been here 2 weeks. Are you sure you want her input on the merger?" Alexander felt a flash of irritation, unusual for him. "Her insights are valuable, Jordan. I suggest you pay attention to them yourself." Jordan backed away, confusion flickering across his face. The office began to whisper, "Why does he favor her so much? Is there something going on between them? I heard he canceled a board meeting just to review files with her." But here's what disturbed Alexander most. He couldn't explain his own behavior. Each time he followed Lila's advice, part of his mind screamed that this wasn't rational, wasn't like him. Yet the pull was irresistible. When she suggested something, every fiber of his being wanted to comply. It felt good, natural, and right. Not everyone at Drake Tower moved through the building with purpose and ambition. Some simply existed. Marcus Thompson had been cleaning the offices of Drake Tower for 33 years. He had seen CEOs come and go, watched empires rise and crumble, witnessed secrets that would destroy reputations and end careers. But Marcus never spoke of what he saw. In the ecosystem of corporate power, janitors were invisible, and invisibility, Marcus had learned, was the greatest superpower of all. At 71, Marcus moved through the building like a ghost, emptying trash bins, polishing floors, observing everything. He developed a sixth sense for patterns, for anomalies, for the subtle shifts in human behavior that others missed. And Lila Harper, she was an anomaly. Her competence wasn't what was different. Plenty of capable people worked at Drake Tower. It wasn't even her rapid rise in Alexander's favor. Office politics created stranger alliances. It was something else, something in the way people's eyes glazed slightly when she spoke to them, the way conversations shifted when she entered a room, the way Alexander Drake, the most iron-willed man Marcus had ever encountered, seemed to melt in her presence. Marcus had seen this before, decades ago, in Paris, during a brief stint working for a hotel. A woman, elegant and mysterious, who wielded influence that defied explanation. Men of power became puppets in her hands, and she wore a pendant, an ornate cameo that seemed to pulse with its own energy. When that woman finally left Paris, 3 marriages had dissolved, 2 business empires had transferred ownership, and one man had walked away from a political career to follow her to Morocco, never to be heard from again. Marcus remembered the pendant, he remembered the pattern, and now, watching Lila Harper from the shadows, watching Alexander Drake transform from titan to devotee, Marcus saw the pattern repeating. By the fourth week, Alexander's obsession, he could no longer deny that's what it was, had become all-consuming. He arrived at the office earlier each day, motivated not by work but by the prospect of seeing Lila. He stayed later, engineering reasons to require her presence after hours. During meetings, his attention would drift whenever she entered his peripheral vision, that silver crescent catching the light, drawing his gaze like a beacon. His board of directors grew concerned. Alexander, you've been distracted lately. Claire Morrison, his CFO and one of his few genuine allies, confronted him after a particularly disastrous presentation. That acquisition proposal was half-baked. You've never presented anything half-baked in your life. What's going on? I'm fine, Claire, says Alexander. I am just reconsidering our strategic direction. On the advice of your secretary. Claire's eyes narrowed. People are talking, Alexander. They're saying you're making decisions based on her recommendations. A woman who's been here less than a month. Her insights are valuable. Alexander interrupted. Her insights. Claire's voice rose. So you will choose her over ours, Alexander. She suggested we divest from 3 of our most profitable divisions. She recommended we invest heavily in sustainable energy when our entire profit model is built on cloud services, and you're actually considering it. Because she's right. The words exploded from Alexander with an intensity that shocked them both. He took a breath, lowered his voice. Claire, I know how this looks, but Lila has a perspective that what? Claire interrupted, a perspective that defies every business principle we've built this company on. Claire leaned forward, her expression shifting from anger to concern. Alexander, I've known you for 12 years, this isn't you. Please, just take a step back, look at what's happening objectively. But objectivity had become impossible. That night, Alexander stayed in the office until nearly midnight, long after Lila had gone home. He sat in his leather chair, staring at the city lights, trying to understand what was happening to him. He pulled up Lila's employment file on his computer. The background check had been thorough. They always were for positions close to him. Born in Boston, modest middle-class family. Father was a literature professor. Mother ran a small antique shop. Excellent academic record. No red flags. Nothing unusual, except. Alexander clicked through to a deeper background report one more time. This was compiled by his private security team. There was a notation, flagged as potentially irrelevant, maternal lineage traces to a family with historical associations to mystical artifacts and occult practices in 18th century New England. No evidence of criminal activity or cult involvement, just mystical artifacts. Alexander laughed a hollow bitter sound. This was insane. He was a man of science, of data, of measurable outcomes. Mystical artifacts belonged in fantasy novels, not in the boardrooms of Manhattan. Yet he couldn't shake the image of that crescent pendant, the way it seemed to glow with its own inner light. The breaking point came during a crucial board meeting 5 weeks after Lila's arrival. Alexander was presenting a complete restructuring of the company, a plan that he had to admit was largely based on Lila's suggestions. The board listened in stunned silence as he proposed liquidating their most profitable divisions to invest in experimental green technology. Alexander, Richard Chen, the board chairman, finally spoke. This plan it's corporate suicide, we'll lose billions in the transition, shareholders will revolt, are you having some kind of breakdown? This is the future, says Alexander. No, this is insanity. Richard's fist hit the table, and I want to know who's really behind this plan, because the Alexander Drake I know would never propose something this reckless. All eyes turned to Lila, who sat quietly in the corner, taking notes. Is it her? Richard demanded, your secretary? Has she somehow convinced you to destroy everything you've built? Alexander stood, rage flooding through him, but underneath the anger was something else, fear, because part of him, a small terrified part, wondered if Richard was right. This meeting is over, Alexander said coldly. I'll expect your support when we vote next week, as the board filed out. Muttering and exchanging concerned glances, Marcus Thompson appeared in the doorway. The old janitor stood there, his lined face grave, his eyes holding knowledge that seemed ancient. "Mr. Drake," Marcus said quietly, "I need to speak with you, it's important." They met in Alexander's office after everyone else had left. The city sprawled below them, millions of lights twinkling in the darkness. Oblivious to the drama unfolding 72 floors above, he didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You're under a spell, Mr. Drake." Alexander stared at him. "Excuse me, I've seen this before, long ago, in Paris, a woman with an enchanted object, in her case, a cameo, but in Miss Harper's case, it is a pendant. It creates influence, draws people to the wearer, makes them susceptible to suggestion, particularly people with power, wealth, or deep loneliness." "This is ridiculous," Alexander said. "Is it?" Marcus's eyes were steady, unwavering. "Then explain your behavior these past 5 weeks, explain why you're making decisions that contradict everything you believe, explain why you can't go an hour without thinking about her, why her approval matters more to you than your own judgment." Alexander opened his mouth to protest, then closed it, because he couldn't explain, and that terrified him more than any business failure ever could. "The pendant she wears," Marcus continued, "is an heirloom. These objects have been passed down through certain bloodlines for centuries. Most people don't even know what they possess. The magic is subtle, unconscious. Ms. Harper likely has no idea of the effect she's having on you." "Magic," Alexander repeated flatly. "You're talking about actual magic. I'm talking about influence that operates beyond normal human interaction. Call it magic, call it psychic resonance, call it quantum entanglement. I don't care about the terminology. What matters is that you're no longer in control of your own mind, and if you continue down this path, you'll lose everything." Alexander turned to the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. 5 weeks ago, he would have laughed at this conversation. 5 weeks ago, he would have had Marcus escorted from the building and possibly committed to psychiatric evaluation. But 5 weeks ago, he hadn't met Lila Harper. "What do I do?" The question emerged as barely a whisper. Marcus stepped closer. "That's the difficult part. The influence is powerful, but it's not absolute. You have to want to break free, you have to fight it consciously, every moment, every decision, and you have to confront the source." "I have to confront Lila?" Alexander asked. "She needs to know what she is, what she carries. Knowledge is the first step to breaking these cycles." Alexander closed his eyes. "She'll think I'm insane, maybe, or maybe she's been unconsciously aware that something unusual surrounds her all her life. Either way, you owe her the truth, and you owe yourself your freedom. Perhaps, you are the chosen one." After the janitor said those words, the air between them went cold. The CEO laughed, short but uneasy. "Chosen for what?" But the old man didn't smile, he simply leaned closer and whispered, "Because lonely men with power are the easiest to bind." Alexander didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse apartment, a museum of success perched high above Central Park, and tried to piece together the fragments of his shattered worldview. Magic, enchantment, mystical artifacts, every rational fiber of his being rejected these concepts, yet the evidence was undeniable. His behavior had changed dramatically. His decision-making, once sharp, analytical, ruthless in its efficiency, had become emotional, impulsive, centered entirely around pleasing one person. He'd watched himself transform, powerless to stop it. Around 3 in the morning, he pulled out his phone and began researching. If this was real, if these objects truly existed, there would be historical records, academic papers, something, and what he found chilled him. Scattered across centuries, buried in folklore and academic journals, were accounts of objects that influenced human behavior: the Hand of Glory, the Ring of Gyges, the Philosopher's Stone. Most were dismissed as mythology, but some scholars proposed that a kernel of truth lay beneath the legends, that certain objects, through mechanisms not yet understood by science, could affect human consciousness. One article, published in a fringe anthropology journal, focused specifically on crescent moon pendants. Lunar talismans, historical accounts of influence and attraction in pre-modern societies. The author, a retired archaeologist named Dr. Helena Frost, documented 17 separate historical instances of women wearing crescent pendants who wielded inexplicable influence over powerful men. The common thread? All the women were descendants of families with roots in mystical traditions, most were unaware of their lineage or the true nature of what they wore. Alexander found Dr. Frost's contact information at 4 in the morning. The reply came 6 hours later. Mr. Drake, I've been waiting for someone like you to reach out. These objects are real, the influence is real, and you're in grave danger, not of physical harm, but of losing yourself entirely. The pendant doesn't create feelings from nothing, it amplifies existing vulnerabilities, exploits loneliness, magnifies attraction. You became susceptible the moment you encounter it. The only way to break the influence is through conscious resistance and avoiding it. A better way is by direct confrontation with the source. The wearer must be made aware. Once consciousness enters the equation, the spell weakens, but you be very careful, these revelations can be devastating for both parties. Yours truly, Dr. Frost. As dawn broke over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Alexander made his decision. He would confront Lila. Friday afternoon, Alexander asked Lila to stay late. His hands trembled slightly as he made the request, partly from the withdrawal of fighting the pendant's influence, partly from fear of what would happen next. At 7 o'clock, they were alone in his office. The building had emptied, leaving only the ambient hum of electronics and the distant sounds of the city below. Lila, we need to talk about something unusual. She looked up from her tablet, those hazel eyes curious and open. Of course, Mr. Drake. What is it? How did one begin this conversation? How did one tell someone they were unknowingly wielding supernatural influence? Over the past 5 weeks, he began carefully. I've noticed changes in my behavior, significant changes, and I've come to believe that these changes are connected to you, specifically, to that pendant you wear. Lila's hand instinctively went to the crescent at her throat. My necklace. I know how this sounds. Believe me, I've questioned my sanity more times than I can count, but I've done research, consulted experts, and the evidence is compelling. That pendant is an enchanted object. It creates influence, draws people to you, makes them susceptible to your suggestions. Silence filled the room. Lila stared at him, her expression shifting from confusion to concern to something that looked like fear. Mr. Drake, are you feeling all right? I'm perfectly lucid, Lila, more lucid than I've been in weeks. This isn't a delusion. Think about your life. Have you noticed patterns? People becoming unusually attached to you, relationships that felt intense but somehow unreal, opportunities that arose too easily. Her face went pale. How did you know about this? Because it's happening to me. I've reorganized my entire company based on your suggestions. I've canceled board meetings just to spend time with you. I think about you constantly and obsessively. This isn't normal attraction, Lila. This is influence operating beyond conscious control. Lila stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. You're suggesting I've been, what? Magically manipulating you? No, not consciously. I don't believe you have any idea what you're doing. But the pendant, where did you get it? She touched the silver crescent again, this time with trembling fingers. It was my grandmother's. She gave it to me before she died, told me to never take it off, that it would protect me. I thought it was just sentimental. Your grandmother. What was her background? She was eccentric, claimed to be descended from some old New England family with mystical traditions. I always thought it was harmless eccentricity. You know, every family has stories. What if the stories were real? Lila sank back into her chair, her face a mask of shock and confusion. Oh my God, Jason. Who's Jason? Alexander asked. My ex-boyfriend. We dated for 3 years. He was obsessed. Couldn't make decisions without consulting me, organized his entire life around my preferences. When I broke up with him, he had a complete breakdown. He said he felt like he was emerging from a fog. I thought he was being dramatic, but what if? She looked up at Alexander, horror dawning in her eyes. What if I've been doing this my whole life without knowing? What followed was the most honest conversation Alexander had experienced in years, perhaps in his entire life. They talked for hours, dissecting the past 5 weeks, identifying moments when the influence had been strongest. Lila recounted her relationship history, a trail of intense attachments that burned bright and fizzled quickly, leaving confusion in their wake. I always wondered why I couldn't maintain relationships. She confessed, tears streaming down her face. I thought there was something wrong with me, that I was somehow broken, but it was this. She gripped the pendant. It was always this. "You're not broken, Lila, you're carrying something you didn't choose, something you didn't understand. But the damage is real, the people I've hurt are real. Jason, my college roommate who became obsessed with being my friend, even my mother. She deferred to me on everything, even though I was just a girl. I reshaped her whole life." Alexander reached across the desk, then stopped himself. Even with the knowledge between them, the pull was there, weaker, perhaps, but present. Knowledge is the antidote. He said, "Now that we both understand what's happening, we can fight it. Should I take it off and destroy it? I don't know. You said Dr. Frost's research suggests that the objects are neutral. They amplify what's already there. Your influence might be natural charisma magnified by the pendant. Removing it could help, or it could just shift the dynamic." Lila unclasped the necklace with shaking hands. The moment it left her skin, something changed in the air, a subtle shift, like pressure releasing from a sealed room. Alexander felt it, the constant pull, the magnetic draw. It lessened, not disappeared, but became manageable. "How do you feel?" he asked, lighter and terrified. She set the pendant on the desk between them. "What do we do now?" "Nothing, we do nothing and just watch." Monday morning brought new challenges. The board had called an emergency meeting to address what they termed Alexander's erratic leadership. He sat at the head of the conference table, Lila conspicuously absent, the entire board staring at him with varying degrees of concern and hostility. "Alexander," Richard Chin began, "we've reviewed your proposed restructuring plan. We've also reviewed your decision-making process over the past month. And we have serious concerns about your fitness to lead this company." "I understand those concerns," Alexander said calmly, "and I'm prepared to address them. Are you prepared to address the fact that you've been taking strategic advice from a secretary with no background in our industry, that you've proposed liquidating billions in assets based on her recommendations? Ms. Harper is no longer in that role. She's resigned. Effective immediately." Shocked murmurs rippled through the room. Furthermore, Alexander continued, "I'm withdrawing the restructuring proposal. It was based on flawed analysis." Claire leaned forward. "Alexander, what happened? What changed?" He met her eyes steadily. "I lost perspective. I allowed personal feelings to cloud professional judgment. It won't happen again." The board exchanged glances. This was contrition they hadn't expected, vulnerability they'd never seen from Alexander Drake. "We appreciate your candor," Richard said carefully, "but we need assurances. You'll have them. Full transparency on all major decisions, weekly strategic reviews, and I'm taking a month of leave. Effective immediately. Claire will serve as interim CEO." Lila smiled sadly. "You're very wise for someone who claims to have lost perspective. Wisdom and perspective are different things. I've gained the former while recovering the latter." They sat in silence for a moment, the cafe's ambient noise, clinking cups, murmured conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine, filling the space between them. "Can I ask you something?" Lila finally said. "Now that you're free of the influence, now that you understand what was happening, do you still feel anything for me, or was it all the pendant?" Alexander considered the question carefully. This was the crux of it, wasn't it, the fundamental uncertainty that would haunt both of them. "I don't know," he admitted, "and I think that's the honest answer. There was genuine admiration, genuine attraction. But how much was amplified by magic? How much was real? I may never know for certain. That's terrifying, it is. But it's also human. Even without magical interference, we never really know where our feelings come from. Chemistry, psychology, circumstance. We're all influenced by forces beyond our control. Your pendant just made it more obvious." Lila reached across the table, stopped, withdrew her hand. "I'm sorry, Alexander, for all of it. Don't be. You didn't choose this. And honestly, these past weeks, despite the manipulation, despite the loss of control, they woke me up. I've been sleepwalking through life, convinced that isolation was strength. You showed me what I was missing, even if it was built on enchantment." Lila asked. "Yes, even then, sometimes the truth arrives wrapped in lies. What matters is what we do with it." 6 months later, Alexander stood once again at the window of his office, watching the city pulse below him. Drake Tower still gleamed. The company had recovered from his months of questionable decisions caused by Alex. The board had relaxed, life had returned to normal, except Alexander had changed. He'd spent his leave traveling, not to luxury resorts, but to small towns and quiet places. He'd reconnected with his sister in California, met his nephews for the first time, he'd volunteered at a homeless shelter, attended a group therapy session for executives dealing with burnout, he'd learned to be human again. Lila had moved to Seattle, taking a position with a nonprofit focused on mystical artifact research. They exchanged emails occasionally, friendly, distant and careful. Marcus Thompson still cleaned the offices, still observed everything with his knowing eyes and wisdom. But here's the twist, the detail that would change everything. Last week, going through old family documents for an estate matter, Alexander had discovered something shocking, a letter from his grandmother to his mother, dated 30 years ago. Dearest Margaret, I'm sending you the family heirloom we discussed, a small silver pendant in the shape of a sun. Your father wore it for years before passing it to me. It's brought our family great fortune, though we've never quite understood why. I hope it serves Alexander well when he comes of age. Make sure he wears it always, particularly when building his career. It will help him command respect and loyalty. Alexander had found the pendant in his safety deposit box, a silver sun on a delicate chain. He'd worn it every day since his 21st birthday, on his grandmother's instructions. Tucked beneath his shirt where no one could see it, for 17 years, he pulled it out now, held it up to the light. It glimmered with the same strange luminescence as Lila's crescent moon. All this time, he'd thought he was the victim of enchantment. All this time, he'd been wielding his own magic, commanding loyalty and respect through supernatural influence he'd never known he possessed. The board's unwavering support despite his risky decisions, the employees who would work themselves to exhaustion on his behalf, the investors who trusted him with billions based on little more than his word. How much had been his brilliance, how much had been the pendant, and Lila, when they'd met, when the attraction had sparked between them, had it been the clash of two enchantments, two people wielding influence over each other, creating a feedback loop of supernatural attraction? Alexander laughed, a genuine, full-bodied laugh that echoed through his empty office. He'd spent 6 months learning to live with uncertainty, to accept that he might never know the true nature of his feelings for Lila. Now he faced a deeper uncertainty. He might never know the true nature of himself. The city sprawled below him, millions of people pursuing their dreams, building their empires, falling in love and falling apart. How many of them were truly free? How many were influenced by forces they couldn't see and couldn't understand? Maybe everyone was enchanted in their own way. Maybe magic was just another word for the invisible forces that shaped human life, psychology, chemistry, chance. Or maybe, just maybe, the universe was stranger than anyone dared to admit. Alexander tucked the sun pendant back beneath his shirt. He'd call Dr. Frost tomorrow, arrange for research, seek understanding. But for tonight, he'd let the uncertainty sit with him. He'd learned to be comfortable with not knowing. After all, wasn't that what it meant to be human, to live in the space between knowledge and ignorance, power and vulnerability, magic and reality, to never be quite sure where we end and the enchantments begin? Some stories end with answers, but this one ends with questions. Was Alexander Drake a self-made billionaire, or did he ride to success on the invisible tide of enchantment? Was his attraction to Lila real, or merely the collision of two magical objects? And most importantly, does it matter? Perhaps the real spell wasn't in the pendants at all. Perhaps it was in the human need to believe we're in control, that our choices are our own, that we know ourselves completely more than anyone. Marcus Thompson, the janitor who sees all, once told Alexander something profound. We're all under someone's influence, Mr. Drake. Magic just makes it visible. If you've enjoyed this journey into the hidden corners of power and influence, into the spaces where certainty dissolves and wonder creeps in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, because the story of Alexander Drake and Lila Harper, this is just the beginning. Next time, we'll explore what happened when they met again, both wearing their talismans, both fully aware of the power they wielded. That meeting would shatter everything they thought they knew. But that